Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a tiny girl, no older than 7, sprinting toward a police officer with tears streaming down her face. She pulls on his sleeve and whispers, "Please, follow me home." What the officers discovered next didn't just break their hearts, it changed their entire understanding of courage. It all began on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon, a day that had started quietly and without incident. The streets were filled with the hum of daily life, the distant sound of cars, the chatter of neighbors, and the occasional bark of a dog. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what was about to unfold. From around the corner, a small figure appeared, moving with frantic urgency. It was a little girl, no older than 7 or 8, her clothes slightly wrinkled and her hair tangled, as if she had been running for some time. Her tiny feet pounded against the pavement, but there was no sense of playfulness or carelessness in her steps. Every movement carried a desperate purpose, a silent plea that could be felt even from a distance. As she came closer, it became clear that she was crying. Her face was flushed red, not from exertion alone, but from pure distress. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving streaks through the dirt and sweat. Her lips quivered, and every so often, she would let out a small sob, quickly swallowed by an even more determined look of resolve. She was searching, scanning her surroundings frantically, and then, suddenly, she spotted them, a group of police officers standing nearby, casually observing the street. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear that had been paralyzing her for minutes, maybe hours, was replaced with determination. She had decided, in the only way a child could, that these strangers were her only hope. With a burst of energy, she ran straight toward the officers, calling out between hiccups and sobs, her small voice trembling yet filled with urgency. When the officers noticed her, they instinctively paused. There was something unusual about the way she moved, the way she approached them. It wasn't just fear. It was a plea for help, a silent signal that something was terribly wrong. She reached the nearest officer and grabbed the edge of his uniform, her tiny hands barely able to hold on. She looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with tears, desperation, and a kind of raw honesty that only a child could display. "Please, please follow me home," she whispered, her voice breaking with each word. There was no hesitation in her tone, only an almost unbearable urgency. Those words, simple and short, carried a weight far beyond her years. They revealed a child who had been forced to confront a situation no one should ever face. Someone who had been thrust into a role of responsibility far too early in life. In her plea, the officers could sense her fear, her confusion, and her absolute certainty that something terrible had happened inside her home. It was the kind of moment that stops people in their tracks. The officers could see it all, the trembling hands, the tear-streaked cheeks, the way she bit her lip to keep herself from crying out fully. There was no pretense in her actions. No child would run to a stranger on the street unless something inside screamed that it was urgent, that lives depended on it. The vulnerability she displayed was profound. Every tiny detail, from the way her shoulders shook to the way her eyes darted nervously, spoke volumes about the invisible burden she had been carrying. As the officers knelt down to her level, trying to calm her, the gravity of the situation became even more apparent. Her words, though few, were loaded with meaning. She didn't say, "Can you help my mother?" or "I think something is wrong." She didn't speak in questions or vague hints. She said simply, "Please, follow me home." That was all she could manage, and yet it was enough. Enough to convey urgency, enough to communicate fear, and enough to demand immediate action. What struck the officers most was not only the fear in her eyes, but also the courage. Here was a little girl, trembling and crying, yet determined to take control of a situation far beyond her understanding. She had made a split-second decision. She would leave the safety of her home, venture into the street, and find help. That alone was a remarkable act of bravery. In the face of uncertainty and terror, she had chosen action over inaction, hope over despair. She had run not for herself, but for someone she loved deeply, someone who depended on her. As the officers listened to her and prepared to follow, they couldn't help but notice the way she glanced back at the street behind her. Her eyes flicked nervously, almost instinctively, scanning for danger, as if she wanted to make sure that no harm would reach them, or perhaps that no harm would come to her mother while she sought help. There was a maturity in that moment, a glimpse of a resilience forged out of necessity rather than choice. It was the emotional intensity of a child forced to confront fear and channel it into courage. Every second of that encounter was heavy with emotion. The little girl's cries echoed the silent panic that words couldn't capture. Her body trembled with exhaustion, her voice cracked, yet she persisted. And in that persistence, she held the attention and hearts of the officers completely. No one had to wonder what was happening. Her urgency, her distress, and her bravery made it unmistakably clear that this was not a routine situation. Something profound, life-changing, and heart-wrenching was unfolding, and they were right at the center of it. This emotional moment, brief as it might have seemed to the outside world, carried the weight of a lifetime. It revealed fear and innocence, vulnerability and courage, despair and hope, all encapsulated in one small, trembling figure. The little girl's tears, her pleading eyes, and her trembling hands were more than just signs of distress. They were a silent testament to the lengths one can go to protect those they love. The words were simple, almost too simple to carry the weight they did. Please, follow me home. Yet in those 3 words, there was an entire universe of fear, desperation, and instinct. There was a child's understanding that something was terribly wrong inside the 4 walls of her home, and that no adult in her life, at least at that moment, could handle it alone. There was a recognition that the ordinary, safe world she knew had suddenly become unsafe, and that the only recourse was to reach beyond the boundaries of familiarity for help. When the little girl spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It cracked, faltered, and trembled as if it were carrying not just her own panic, but the silent weight of someone else's suffering. And yet, despite the fragility in her tone, there was a quiet insistence, a determination that said, without a shadow of doubt, that she would not be ignored. She knew that to survive, to protect, to possibly save a life, she had to be heard. For anyone witnessing the scene, it was impossible to ignore the urgency radiating from her small frame. Her eyes, wide and pleading, were mirrors of a child forced to grow up in an instant. They darted back and forth, scanning the faces of the officers, almost as if checking whether they understood the severity of her plea. Each blink seemed to punctuate her words, adding layers of emotion that even she may not have fully grasped. There was no time to explain, no time to negotiate. Only immediate action could suffice. The phrase, "Please follow me home," was not delivered in a casual tone. It was laden with the weight of responsibility and fear. A child who might otherwise have been thinking about school, games, or chores was now thrust into a situation where she had to articulate danger and urgency with every ounce of her small body. There was a physicality to her plea, her hands gripping at the officer's sleeve, her body leaning forward as if to propel them into motion. She was not just speaking, she was commanding attention through sheer need, through instinct, through love. What made this moment even more compelling was the absolute absence of hesitation. There was no uncertainty in her actions, only clarity of purpose. She did not run aimlessly, nor did she wander without direction. Every step she took toward the officers, every shuddering breath, every tear that fell down her cheek, was a silent signal: something is wrong, and it is urgent. In that instant, she became both messenger and protector, tasked with bridging the gap between danger and safety, helplessness and intervention. The officers, recognizing the seriousness in her words, felt a shift in the atmosphere. Normally, an encounter with a child on the street might involve questions, reassurance, or guidance. But the little girl's plea brooked no delay. It demanded immediate, unquestioning attention, And the urgency was not manufactured or exaggerated. It was real, raw, and palpable. You could almost feel it pressing against the air, creating tension that was impossible to ignore. In observing her, one could see how fear and courage intertwined in a paradoxical dance. The little girl was terrified, her body shaking with adrenaline and anxiety. Yet, at the same time, she exuded bravery that far exceeded her years. The urgency in her voice was not born of recklessness. It was born of necessity. She had measured the stakes, understood the danger, and acted with precision dictated by instinct rather than experience. It was the clarity of someone who knew that any delay could be catastrophic. And yet, even in her urgency, there were glimpses of vulnerability. Her shoulders trembled with each breath. Her hands, though gripping tightly, shook uncontrollably. Her voice wavered as she repeated the plea, almost as if she needed to remind herself of the courage she was forcing from within. In that trembling, frantic figure, the officers could see both the fragility and the strength of a child who had no choice but to grow up in a single, terrifying moment. The urgency was further amplified by what was left unsaid. The little girl did not explain the situation. She did not narrate the events that had led to this point. There were no detailed accounts, no explanations of why her home was unsafe, no attempt to rationalize the danger to the adults she sought for help. That information was implicit. The plea alone carried the gravity of the moment. The simplicity of her request, "Please follow me home," was a powerful signal that spoke louder than words could ever convey. It demanded trust, immediate attention, and decisive action. And in that tension, between urgency and vulnerability, fear and courage, there was a lesson about the human instinct to protect and the clarity of purpose that sometimes only a child can express. The urgency was a bridge between panic and hope. It was a lifeline thrown from a small, trembling hand to the capable adults who could respond. It was an unspoken promise that, if followed, action could lead to rescue, to safety, to life itself. As the officers followed the little girl, the air seemed to grow heavier with every step. There was a tension that was almost tangible, a quiet, unspoken understanding that what awaited them behind the door was something far beyond a routine call for help. The girl's small hand guided them swiftly through narrow streets, past familiar houses until they finally arrived at a modest, weathered home tucked between two larger buildings. She stopped in front of the door and with trembling fingers tried to turn the doorknob. When it didn't move easily, she pulled with all her strength, her small body straining against the weight of a situation far too big for her age. Finally, the door gave way. Inside, the scene that greeted the officers was one they would never forget. The home, quiet and still, carried a sense of eerie emptiness. The faint smell of unwashed dishes and household chores hung in the air, but it was overshadowed by something far darker, a profound sense of distress. The officer's eyes immediately found her mother, lying motionless on the living room floor. She was slumped against the wall, her body partially collapsed, her breathing shallow and irregular. The officers could see that she was unconscious, barely clinging to life. There were signs of struggle, disheveled furniture, a knocked-over chair, scattered items on the floor. But the most harrowing part was the silent helplessness of the woman. Her face, usually animated with warmth and care, was pale, drawn, and streaked with sweat. Her chest rose and fell in uneven intervals, each breath shallow and fragile. The little girl, standing behind the officers, watched with wide, terrified eyes. She had guided them here, but now the full reality of the situation hit her. She pressed herself against the wall, her small frame quivering, yet there was a strange steadiness in the way she held herself. She had done her part. Now it was up to the adults to do theirs. The officers acted immediately. One knelt beside the woman, checking for responsiveness, while another called for emergency medical assistance. Their training took over, yet even as they worked with calm efficiency, the gravity of the moment was undeniable. The little girl's actions had brought them here, and now every second counted. One delay could mean the difference between life and death. As the officers assessed her condition, they began to understand the severity of the situation. The woman's skin was clammy, her lips tinged blue, and her pulse faint. She was in critical condition, on the brink of something irreversible. The room seemed to shrink around them, the silence punctuated only by the small, desperate sobs of the child and the low, steady instructions of the officers. The little girl's presence was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She had run to these strangers not out of casual fear, but out of necessity. She had understood, instinctively, that her mother needed help, and she had acted without hesitation. Now, seeing the full extent of the danger, the officers realized the magnitude of her courage. She was a child thrust into the role of protector, navigating a crisis that most adults would find overwhelming. In that moment, the officers also saw the deep bond between mother and daughter. The woman's unconscious state contrasted sharply with the alert, terrified, yet resolute posture of her child. The little girl's eyes never left her mother, scanning for signs of recovery, for any hint that she was breathing more easily. She whispered softly, almost to herself, words of comfort and encouragement, though they barely reached beyond the edges of the room. It was a moment of pure, instinctive love, the kind that drives someone to extraordinary lengths when faced with danger. The discovery of her mother's condition also highlighted the precarious balance between fear and hope. For the officers, this was a test of their skill and training, but for the little girl, it was a matter of survival and protection. She had arrived in a state of urgency, crying for help, and now she witnessed the very stakes of her plea, the reality of the situation, the seriousness of her mother's condition, hit with full force. Yet, even in her fear, there was determination. She had initiated the rescue. She would not let it falter. As medical personnel arrived and began to take over, the officers continued to comfort the child. They knelt beside her, gently placing hands on her small shoulders, explaining that help was here now. But even as they reassured her, the little girl's mind was already elsewhere, focused entirely on her mother. She followed every movement, every adjustment of the medical team, absorbing every word, every sound, every sign that her mother's life might be saved. Her small frame trembled, not from weakness, but from the intensity of the moment and the emotional weight of the responsibility she had carried alone until now. The discovery of her mother in such critical condition was a turning point. It was the moment when urgency became reality, when a child's fear became a tangible crisis, and when the bravery of a little girl was validated by the stark danger she had confronted. Every detail, the shallow breathing, the pale skin, the fragile pulse rate, forced the seriousness of the situation. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was also a profound sense of hope, born entirely from the little girl's courage. Without her, the outcome might have been tragically different. In that moment, the officers realized that heroism is not measured by size or age. Heroism can come from anyone, even a 7-year-old girl who sees danger and acts decisively despite the terror it brings. Her actions had turned a life-threatening situation into a story of potential survival. And while the immediate focus was on saving her mother, the underlying narrative was clear. Bravery and love can defy circumstance, age, and expectation. Every movement, every sound in that small home carried significance. The child's initial urgency had led to this life-saving discovery, but it was the combination of instinct, determination, and love that had brought the officers to the right place at the right time. It was a moment where fear and hope collided, where a small child's courage intersected with professional training, and where a family's fate hung in the balance. In the story of that fateful day, what stands out most vividly is not just the danger itself, but the courage of the little girl who faced it. Bravery often takes many forms, but in her case, it was raw, instinctive, and profoundly human. Here was a child, barely 7 years old, standing at the threshold of terror, fully aware of the danger, yet propelled by something far stronger than fear, a sense of responsibility and love. The moment she realized her mother was in danger, fear must have gripped her completely. After all, this was no ordinary challenge. This was a life or death situation. Most adults would hesitate, would pause in disbelief, would be paralyzed by the enormity of the crisis, but not her. Though trembling and sobbing, she made a conscious choice. She would act. She would take responsibility, and she would do it alone until help arrived. It is remarkable, almost unimaginable, to think of a child in that position. She had no training, no prior experience, no guidance. Yet she became the first responder in the most crucial moments of her mother's life. Her mind processed the urgency, the possible consequences, and the steps required to ensure help would come. She identified the only course of action she could take: run to the nearest authority she could trust, the police. That decision, simple as it may seem to an adult, was the culmination of courage, foresight, and determination far beyond her years. Every step she took toward the officers was an act of bravery. With each trembling footfall, each tearful glance, she defied the instinct to run away from danger, which is natural in children. Instead, she approached strangers, revealing herself and her vulnerability completely, knowing that she needed their help to save someone she loved more than anything. It is hard to overstate the courage it takes for a child to trust strangers in the midst of chaos, especially when her heart was pounding with fear. Her bravery was not loud or heroic in the cinematic sense. There were no dramatic proclamations, no daring stunts, no physical feats. Her courage was quiet, almost invisible, yet profoundly powerful. It was the bravery of action in the face of fear. It was the decision to take responsibility when she had no obligation to do so. She could have hidden, she could have screamed for neighbors, she could have done nothing at all. But she did not. She acted decisively. She acted with love, and her decisiveness was evident in every choice she made. She did not stop. She did not waver. She did not second-guess herself. The urgency in her eyes and the clarity in her actions demonstrated a rare maturity. She assessed the situation instinctively. Her mother was in danger. She could not help her alone, and the police were the only solution. With that understanding, she ran, she cried, and she pleaded, giving the officers exactly the guidance they needed. Without hesitation, she led them directly to the critical scene, ensuring that every second counted. What is even more remarkable is that her courage was not fueled by a lack of understanding of danger. She knew that something terrible had happened. She had seen signs of distress and perhaps even pain or injury. Yet she did not allow fear to immobilize her. In that sense, her bravery was conscious and deliberate. She understood risk and chose to confront it anyway because the stakes, the life of her mother, were far greater than her own fear. This is a lesson in the purest form of heroism, acting not for glory, not for recognition, but out of love and responsibility. Even when the officers arrived at the home, her bravery did not waver. She stayed close, observing every action, every movement, understanding instinctively that her presence mattered. She whispered reassurances to her mother, encouraged the officers with tiny explanations when needed, and never lost focus on the ultimate goal, ensuring that her mother would survive. Her courage was persistent, not fleeting. It was the kind of bravery that does not end when danger begins. It continues through the entire crisis. It is also important to recognize the emotional intelligence intertwined with her courage. She sensed the gravity of the situation, and she managed her fear to act effectively. Many adults would have panicked, perhaps even frozen entirely. But this little girl managed to transform terror into action. She demonstrated a rare balance between emotion and rationality. Fear motivated her, but it did not control her. She allowed love and responsibility to guide her decisions, creating a remarkable example of resilience under pressure. Her bravery had ripple effects beyond her own actions. It inspired the officers, it influenced the medical response, and it ultimately ensured her mother received the help she desperately needed. Without her courage, the crisis could have turned tragic. Her actions serve as a reminder that bravery is not always grandiose or celebrated publicly. It can be quiet, steadfast, and born from the simplest, most human instincts: love, responsibility, and the will to act. In essence, this little girl's bravery redefines what heroism looks like. It shows that courage is not defined by age, size, or experience. It is defined by action, by responsibility, and by the ability to act decisively even when fear threatens to overwhelm. She reminds us that true bravery is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to act despite it. Her bravery was a beacon, illuminating the path from fear to action, from helplessness to hope, and from despair to life-saving intervention. Every tear she shed, every trembling step she took, and every plea she made contributed to a chain of events that would ultimately save her mother. And in that, her courage was absolute, undeniable, and extraordinary. As soon as the officers followed the little girl into the modest home, the gravity of the situation became immediately apparent. The moment they saw her mother lying unconscious on the floor, the officers' training and instinct kicked in, merging seamlessly with the raw urgency of the child's plea. Every second mattered. In a crisis like this, hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Yet in the midst of chaos, there was an almost poetic coordination between the officers' experience and the girl's bravery that had led them here. The officers moved with deliberate speed, assessing the scene while ensuring the little girl remained safe. One knelt beside the woman, checking for responsiveness, while another radioed the emergency medical team. Their actions were precise and calculated, each movement informed by years of experience in dealing with crises. Yet what made this moment extraordinary was how the officers balanced professionalism with empathy. They understood that the child who had guided them here was not only terrified but deeply invested in the outcome. She needed reassurance, and they provided it, gently speaking to her while simultaneously administering aid to her mother. Time became both an enemy and a focus. The woman's shallow breaths, her weak pulse, and her pallid skin were constant reminders that every moment counted. The officers worked quickly to stabilize her, employing life-saving techniques that required skill, composure, and unwavering attention. They cleared her airway, monitored her breathing, and kept her safe until the paramedics arrived. In these actions, the officers transformed the panic and fear that had gripped the household into a controlled, decisive effort to save a life. The child watched closely, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and awe. Though trembling and tearful, she observed each movement of the officers, recognizing in her own way that they were her mother's lifeline. Every step they took, every instruction they followed, reinforced the impact of her decision to act. She had trusted them, and now she was witnessing the power of that trust in real time. Her bravery had led to action, their skill was turning it into survival. The officers also demonstrated a profound understanding of the child's emotional state. While performing life-saving procedures, they ensured she was included, reassured, and guided. They knelt to her level, spoke softly, and explained in simple terms what was happening. This act of compassion, alongside their efficiency, helped to prevent the child from becoming overwhelmed by fear or guilt. They understood that her trauma could be deepened by seeing her mother in distress, so they worked not only to save a life but also to protect her emotionally. As the paramedics arrived, the officers handed over the critical care, providing all necessary details about the mother's condition. The swift transition from police intervention to medical response highlighted the importance of quick decision-making and effective communication. The officers' actions had ensured that no time was wasted. By the time the ambulance left the scene, the mother had a fighting chance at survival, an outcome that would not have been possible without the seamless coordination between the child's initiative and the officer's response. One of the most remarkable aspects of the police response was how they turned a chaotic, emotionally charged scene into a controlled environment conducive to saving a life. The officers were aware that the little girl's presence and her emotional state required sensitivity, yet they did not allow the high stakes to compromise their efficiency. Each instruction, each action, was executed with precision, and the combination of speed and care created a space where hope could flourish even amid crisis. The little girl's bravery and the officer's professionalism were intertwined in a profound way. Her urgent plea had brought them into the home, and their rapid, decisive response had converted her courage into tangible results. This collaboration, though unspoken, formed a chain reaction. Fear transformed into action, action transformed into care, and care transformed into survival. It was a testament to the power of trust, responsiveness, and human compassion working in concert. The officer's actions also underscored an essential truth. Heroism can manifest in different forms. The little girl's bravery had initiated the chain of events, but it was the officer's training, presence of mind, and immediate intervention that provided the second critical link in the chain. In emergencies, courage alone is not always enough. It must be met with skill and action. In this case, the combination of childlike instinct and professional expertise created a life-saving synergy. Even after the paramedics took over, the officers remained attentive, comforting the child and ensuring she knew her mother was receiving help. They recognized the magnitude of her actions, her role in the unfolding events, and the courage it took to confront danger at such a young age. Their acknowledgement and support reinforced the lesson that heroism is not just about responding to crisis, but also about nurturing the bravery of those involved, especially when it comes from unexpected sources like a small, terrified child. In essence, the police response illustrates the profound impact of rapid, skilled, and compassionate action in moments of crisis. Without the officer's decisive intervention, the little girl's courage might have gone unfulfilled. Instead, their actions amplified her bravery, transformed fear into hope, and created the conditions necessary for her mother's survival. Their presence, professionalism, and empathy turned a moment of terror into a story of resilience and life-saving heroism. The story of the little girl who ran to the police pleading, "Please follow me home," teaches a lesson that resonates far beyond the immediate drama of that day. At its core, it is a profound reminder that courage does not have an age, a size, or a title. It does not require experience, rank, or privilege. Courage often emerges in the most unexpected forms, and sometimes it comes from those we least expect, like a child, trembling yet determined, standing in the face of fear with nothing but love and instinct as her guide. From the very beginning, this young girl demonstrated a level of bravery that many adults struggle to summon, even in ordinary circumstances. She did not hesitate, she did not overthink, she acted. That act, so simple in words yet so monumental in impact, became the catalyst for a chain of events that ultimately saved a life. In her decision to seek help, she embodied the essence of courage, recognizing danger, feeling fear, and choosing to act anyway. That is the lesson we must carry with us. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the determination to face it. Her bravery challenges common assumptions about who can be a hero. In our minds, heroism is often linked to physical strength, authority, or expertise. We imagine it as something reserved for trained professionals, seasoned responders, or individuals in positions of power. Yet this little girl's story reminds us that heroism can emerge from the most vulnerable among us. It shows that courage is not bound by age or circumstance. It is bound only by the willingness to act when action is needed most. The lesson extends beyond heroism alone. It is about responsibility, empathy, and love in action. The girl's courage was not self-serving. It was rooted entirely in concern for her mother. True courage, this story suggests, is often an outward force. It is driven by the desire to protect, to care, and to do what is right even when it comes at personal cost. The girl could have run away from the danger, hidden, or sought comfort for herself. Instead, she faced it head-on, understanding instinctively that her actions could make the difference between life and death. Her story also teaches us about the ripple effects of courage. One act of bravery can inspire, motivate, and enable the actions of others. The officers who responded were guided to the scene because of her courage, and their swift action turned her bravery into tangible results. A life saved, a crisis averted. Courage, then, is contagious. It sets into motion a chain of events that extends far beyond the initial actor. A single brave choice can change the course of many lives, transforming fear into hope, panic into purpose, and despair into possibility. Furthermore, her story challenges us to reconsider how we define strength. Strength is often measured in physical terms, or in accomplishments, or in the ability to endure hardship silently. But the little girl's strength was emotional, moral, and relational. It was the strength to confront a terrifying reality, the strength to trust strangers, and the strength to prioritize another person's life above her own comfort and fear. That kind of strength is rare, yet it is available to anyone willing to act with love and courage. Her actions also offer a lesson in leadership. Leaders are often defined by the ability to guide others through uncertainty, to act decisively in moments of crisis, and to inspire confidence in those around them. Remarkably, this little girl exhibited all of these qualities without formal authority, without training, and without an adult's understanding of the world. Leadership in its purest form is not about titles or hierarchy. It is about action, vision, and moral clarity. Her decision to run to the police exemplifies the kind of leadership that arises from clarity of purpose and selfless responsibility. The story reminds us that we should never underestimate the potential within ourselves or others, regardless of age or appearance. Courage and heroism can be hidden in plain sight, waiting for a moment of need to emerge. The little girl's quiet determination transformed a frightening situation into a life-saving one. Her bravery, though small in physical stature, was monumental in impact. It serves as a timeless reminder that every individual, no matter how young or seemingly powerless, has the capacity to make a profound difference in the world. Finally, this story teaches resilience and the human capacity to rise above fear. The little girl's courage did not erase fear. It existed alongside it. Yet she did not allow fear to dictate her actions. Instead, she transformed it into purposeful action. That is a lesson for all of us. Courage is not about being fearless. It is about facing fear and choosing to act in spite of it. In the end, the powerful lesson of this story is universal. Courage is not reserved for the mighty, the experienced, or the grown. It can come from anyone at any age and in the smallest of forms. Sometimes it arrives as a trembling child running through the streets, tears on her face, voice shaking, but with a heart filled with love and a mind focused on doing what is right. That courage can move mountains, save lives, and leave an impact that echoes far beyond the immediate moment. As we reflect on this story, one truth stands clear. Heroism does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the trembling voice of a child. Sometimes it hides in tears, in small hands reaching out for help, in courage that acts despite fear. This little girl reminds us that bravery isn't about age, size, or experience. It's about the choice to do what is right when it matters most. Her story teaches us that courage can inspire others, that love can propel action, and that one small act can change the course of a life. It reminds us to pay attention, to trust instinct, and to act with empathy, because even the smallest among us can create ripples that echo far beyond what we imagine. So, let us carry this lesson with us, in moments of fear, in moments of uncertainty, in moments when the world seems too big or too cruel. Courage is always possible. It lives in our hearts, waiting for the moment we choose to act. And just like that little girl who ran through the streets with nothing but hope and love, each of us has the power to make a difference, to save a life, to protect, to inspire, and to leave the world a little brighter than we found it. Thank you.